Max throwing away the championship in Spain, getting a penalty. But why did he get a penalty? Was George entitled to that corner? His corner, and corner, which rhyme, is Horner going to Ferrari? Is Hulkenberg now better than Hamilton? And is Alonso washed if Hamilton is washed? All of this and more will be answered in this episode of Your Biggest F1 Questions, straight from the dyno's mouth. Hello everybody and welcome to Your Biggest F1 Questions, the weekly episode, podcast, whatever you want to call it, where we discuss and answer your biggest questions straight from the dyno's mouth. I grabbed some questions quickly after the Spanish Grand Prix with very little, no preparation, so this is going to be interesting. Before I jump in, don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you have questions for me to answer, please leave them in the comments of this episode for next week's. But with all that being said, and with all that rambling, let's see what the first question is straight from the dinosaur's mouth. All right, so Charlie asks, straight into the big guns here, no time to warm up. Why did Max have to let George by? Yeah, so obviously this was a big contention in the race. I'm sure there's already a lot of Max Verstappen fans that are quite annoyed about this. Here's a Max Verstappen car thingy, for no reason to show you that, other than to just say I don't hate Max, I guess. That doesn't prove anything. It was like a fiver. Let's get into it. So obviously at the end of the race on the safety car restart, there was a huge jump where Max went from third position and ended up 10th by the end of the race with the penalty. And the question here is obviously focused on why did George or Max have to let George by? Well, that is actually down to the new racing rules that came in at the start of this season. Now, some of you may have been watching the onboards as they came through turn one, as Max was kind of boxed in by George and by Leclerc, had nowhere to go, and went off the track and stayed ahead of George, gaining a lasting advantage, which I assume is what he was given the penalty for. I haven't seen the steward's document there. It may have been for causing the collision, actually. Yes, it was for causing the collision, my bad. But that was the reason he had to give it back, was for gaining a lasting advantage. Now, you may be watching that on board and saying to yourself, yeah, but I mean, Max's front wing was ahead of George's. Now, if you've watched this channel, you've probably already seen me rant about these rules, but actually that's not how it works anymore. Now, George at turn one was overtaking on the inside, which comes to a specific set of racing guidelines that have been in place since the very first race. We've seen highlights of this in Saudi and so on already. But essentially, George, just when he's overtaking on the inside, all he has to do is have his front axle, his front wheels, alongside or ahead, at least alongside Max Verstappen's wing mirror, basically right here on the car. So if you watch the onboard, you could see that the front wing of Max was slightly ahead. In fact, their axles were kind of somewhat here. I would say George's axle was kind of just behind the front wheel of Max. But by that stage, because his wheel was basically alongside the front wing of Max and he was making the corner, as soon as Max went off track, that was it. Essentially, George had completed that move under the regulations, and therefore Max basically had to concede the position. Obviously, the race engineer, GP, why have I forgot his name all of a sudden? Jean-Pierre Lambassi came on GP, came over the radio and said to give it back. He said that's the rules, because Max obviously wasn't happy about it. Max does seem to be having a little bit of difficulty. I don't think it's understanding these rules. It may just be the way he drives and he's just uncompromising. But he does seem to have a little bit of difficulty adapting to these new rules, because he likes to do that completely uncompromising racing. And to be fair to Max as well, 90% of the time it works for him. So you can understand why he would keep going down these routes. But yeah, that was a clear cut, George was entitled to room there. George had the corner under these regulations as it is stipulated. And therefore, Max's only option would be to follow around the outside. And basically, as soon as Max went off the track there, he gave up the position, essentially. So that hopefully answers Charlie's questions. I guess just to go on from that, where he got the penalty, though, was actually for causing a collision, I would imagine. Again, at the time of recording, the actual documentation isn't out yet. But I would imagine it's for causing a collision because he did actually technically give the position back. The reason I say it's probably causing a collision is because I can't remember what the graphic was on screen. So I'm sure by the time this is out later on today, all the information will be there, and we'll have discussed it on the Blatantly Biased Racing podcast as well. But he gave the position back, but then immediately took it back at the corner. So I don't know if that would count as giving it back completely because of where he came back. And either way, he then caused a collision by basically, he let George by and then just drove pretty much straight into him. You could say like George drove into him by taking the corner, but George was taking the apex line. He wasn't expecting Max to come back that way. It would come under either keeping the advantage because he didn't actually let George complete the move, if you want, which he kind of did before, which is why I imagine it would be causing a collision was the actual argument. And if they don't go under that, it'll be dangerous driving. That was a slam dunk penalty for Max. And I think the moment he was put on the hard tires and he lost that position to Leclerc, that's when we've seen kind of that Max that we've seen a few times before. This is kind of, for me, the worst of Max, because I like when Max is uncompromising and unwilling to give anyone an inch, and it's really entertaining to watch even in these situations. But this is the kind of downside of that Max, where he's just thrown away 24 points. He could have thrown away like an extra 3 points if he had, just let George by earlier on. He had the pace, I think, to catch George a little bit later on. George was in a much slower car this weekend for the most part. And worst case scenario, he ends P5, at least getting some points. And the Red Bull was quite quick this weekend. So anyone who says the championship is over, like, it's a long year ahead. And I think he's thrown away more points than he needs to here. We've seen this kind of argument or this kind of Max before in like Hungary, was it last year as well? And I think this is the kind of Max that will lose a championship with that sort of thing. But I don't think he'll stop because 9 times out of 10, this aggression and uncompromising behavior works for Max, which is great to watch for us. It just didn't really work out this time. But yeah, I hope that explains the rules there. It's just a quick interruption to say that the dinosaur has been quite sad lately because over 60% of you watching are not subscribed. And that is a clear signal that you don't like him. I mean, he's already dead. Give him a break. It's just a subscribe button. It's not going to hurt you. It's not going to bite you. That fucking thing might, though. Subscribe. Now back to the video. Let's see what we have next. Bill. Oh, God, this is one that is hurtful. What is happening with Colapinto? Yeah, this is an odd one. I'm kind of, I'm in two minds about how I feel about Colapinto because it's only been 3 races. The first race, I think, as I did with Doohan, I think you have to kind of write off as a learning phase. Doohan in Abu Dhabi last year, for example, you're going up against people who have had testing, have had races. You're going against Gasly, who has been in F1 for a long time and has been in the car for a long time, has done all the testing. So I think the first race is kind of a write-off. The second race is Monaco. I think after the crash in Imola in qualifying, I think he decided to tone the pace down and focus on that. And then I think in Monaco, you kind of have to say, look, well, he was again just focusing on not crashing. This is a race where I also would like to give him a little bit of a benefit of a doubt. And I'll tell you why. I don't want to make too many excuses because, as you all know, I'm a Colapinto fanboy now. And I know this is going to come across as giving him excuses. But in reality, if we look at the race and how it unfolded today, he started on the back foot anyway in P19, and that wasn't his fault. He was actually pretty much like within a tenth or so on the pace of Gasly yesterday, which, I think is a big deal for Colapinto to be there. He was within a tenth of Gasly, and then he had the mechanical failure. So you can't blame that on him. And then today in the race, the problem is he wasn't really going anywhere at any point in the race. But I think if we're being kind of properly pragmatic about how we look at this, Gasly was also just falling down the order and ended up kind of floating, down out of the points anyway. So you could give him some, rope there in terms of how the car just clearly didn't have much performance in race trim. The problem that Colapinto is facing, though, is one, I think, of mentality in terms of He knows this is his final opportunity at staying in F1 in the long term. And I think the fact is, if you just let him go in terms of just out and out pace like Williams did last year and have no real concerns, he's rapidly quick. I mean, we know Albon is very quick. We know Sainz is very quick. And he was alongside Albon last year in terms of results. I mean, literally, I think they had pretty much the same results last year together. You could call out Colapinto for the crashing, but, Albon did crash during those races as well. We know that Williams was quite difficult to drive, all of these different things. I think the problem now is with this pressure and with the Imola crash in qualifying, I think immediately he's mentally trying to not crash. And I genuinely think it's the wrong path to go. I think if this was Williams, he would have more time to kind of get on top of the crashing and then build the performance back up. But with Flavio running that team, as much as he was initially going to be given till the end of the season, he definitely isn't now. And Flavio has actually come out and said, I don't know if it'll be 4 or 5 races, 6 races. So yeah, I think that's a big problem for him. So I think mentality wise, it's gotten on top of him. I think now we have to see what he does in Canada. I think what he does in Canada is going to really play out how much of a season chance he gets here, because Canada is kind of the no excuses race now. He had I think a get out of jail free card in Imola and Monaco. Spain now is kind of, you could blame it somewhat on the car and the qualifying. He has the excuse of the car blew up on him in qualifying. I think Canada, there's no more excuses, and that's really going to be the place where his performance is going to be judged fully, Yeah. So thank you for that one, Bob. Was it Bob? I think it was Bob, right? Maybe wrong. Tim, do you think that Horner would go to Ferrari? So this, thank you for the question, Tim. This is an interesting one because we know that Horner was actually contacted and had some chats with Ferrari. Much like the drivers as well, this happens a lot, when you have these big teams with big budgets and you've got someone like Horner who the rumor mill has been kind of putting outside of Red Bull for a long time. You're going to have these conversations, and it makes sense for Ferrari, who are in a position where it looks like they're not confident in their engine for next year. It looks like, they're not confident in much for next year. And we know that Ferrari, instead of fixing things and instead of the board kind of going, you know what, maybe we should let the guys do their thing for a while, have decided to play team principal bingo once again. And Fred's job might be on the cutting what's it called again? The cutting floor. You know what I mean, I'm sure. But yeah, cutting room floor. That's the one. So yeah, they reached out to Horner. By all accounts, from everything I've heard and from people I've talked to about this, and I know my co-host on the Blatantly Biased Racing podcast last week, Sharan, talked about this, and obviously he's an editor at Sportskeeda, so they have more access than even I do. So the sound is that Horner is just not interested. Now, that would make sense for me because I think Horner at the moment wants to be back in the same situation he was in before. Horner has complete and ultimate control of Milton Keynes. But since the death of Dietrich Mateschitz, the board has been giving him a lot of pressure. And given that they're now no longer the dominant force in F1, it seems like the Thai side is a bit less interested in backing Horner up. Basically, the Thai side sees it as, they're not that interested like the Mazaschitzes were in running the team or being hands-on with the team at all. And as long as the team is absolutely dominating, that's good for Red Bull as a whole. So as the majority shareholders, the 51% shareholders, the Thai side basically said, no, we're winning, we're destroying everyone else. Horner's doing his job, let it go. Now that, Red Bull's not in that position anymore, they kind of are more likely to be, we'll let the Austrian side deal with this. It's no longer as big of a deal. So it seems like he hasn't got that backing from the Thai side as much anymore. So obviously, he is going to be thinking about his next moves. I think he's going to stay in Red Bull for as long as possible. And I think Red Bull, as I've discussed recently in a podcast or, on this show, I believe, Red Bull would be utterly stupid to remove Horner. And if you don't think that, look at the last episode. I think it was the last episode where I talked about this. So I'm not going to go into detail on that again, but the summary is, for the variety of reasons I gave during that time, Red Bull would be utterly idiot. It would be utter idiocy for Red Bull to drop Horner. Just stupidity. Now, where we get to the Ferrari part is, I do think that Horner knows that if they don't win either of the championships this year, which after today, as we've discussed, looks more and more likely, Horner's going to be in a position where he's going to have to think about next moves, because that will be the point where, if they go into a difficult 2026, the Red Bull team could just use him to stupidly, basically, as their blame game, drop someone else in. And the team will then never come back, as I mentioned last week, because it will be board controlled no matter who comes in, because whoever comes in will be at the behest of the board. And a lot of the Milton Keynes staff will absolutely go with Horner wherever he goes. I have a slight hint it could be either Audi or I think less Audi because of Wheatley, but it could be Audi or Alpine. But that's a different conversation. The final part I'll say on this, because I don't want to spend too much time on this, Tim, is the reason he won't go to Ferrari is because I think Ferrari are unwilling to give him what he would want, which is complete and utter control, a long-term contract, and complete hands-off. So he would want to be in the position that John Todt had, essentially by the end of his Ferrari run after dominating with Schumacher. He would want to go in, the board can't overrule him, give him like a 5-year contract, and if they want to cut him out, they're going to have to give him hundreds of millions to cut the contract, to kind of say, look guys, you need to leave me here, because they'd have to justify that spend. He would want to make all the driver decisions, all the technical decisions, everything. And we know that they weren't willing to do that for, Newey, for example. They weren't willing to give him complete unsung technical control, as well as a little bit of a say in the drivers and a share in the company. And Horner's going to want that. I think the reason that Horner would go to Audi or Alpine is, I think either of those would be willing to give him like a sizable stake in the company, like a 24% stake in the company, which I think he wants next if he leaves Red Bull. I think the problem is that Horner would go to Ferrari if they gave him absolute control. Ferrari are not going to do that, which they should. I think if they had a chance of getting Horner, they should do that. But they should have done it with Newey. They won't. So hopefully that answers that question, Tim. Oh God, Alberto. If Hamilton is washed, isn't Alonso? So I've got a lot of stick on the podcast that I've mentioned a few times. You may have noticed, the Blatantly Biased Racing podcast. And the reason for this is, obviously, I've called out Hamilton's performances recently, especially after Monaco, where he was 50 seconds off of Leclerc. Even here, where he qualified ahead of Leclerc. Leclerc did make that clever tyre decision. It was very clever by the end. But Hamilton still finished behind. Hamilton got overtaken by Hulkenberg in a Sauber, while his teammate was finishing on the podium. Hamilton just hasn't been looking good. And I've called him out mainly not because of just this season. In fact, I was one of the few people, I think, saying that, look, as much as I think it was a poor decision by Ferrari, because their problem isn't the drivers for the 1,000th time in their history, he was moving to a new team where he had to adapt to the engine, the team, the car, all of these different things. But, other drivers have done that, rookies have done that, and Hamilton seems to be the one who's still struggling constantly with all of it. And that's why I've said, look, I think that he just can't adapt to these regulations. His confidence is shot. And the reason I've called it out is because, as much as he finished ahead of Russell in the points last year, which Hamilton fans like to bring up, if we look at basically every head-to-head, he was beaten, absolutely in 2 out of those 3 seasons. And Russell would have beaten him clearly on the points as well if it wasn't for the disqualification in Spa and also the DNF in Silverstone. Like, even if he didn't get the DNF in Silverstone and finish 4th, he still would have beat Hamilton on points. So, you're talking like this is a 7-time world championship or champion driver at his own team, lost to the incumbent Russell, and by a wide margin. I mean, in 2024, was it 24 and 22? Like, the head-to-head was crazy, especially in qualifying. In the race, he fared better. He's now come to Ferrari, and it's now 7-2, I think, in qualifying, and 8-1 in the races, I believe. So it's a dominant head to head once again. So I think like Hamilton needs to prove otherwise, because for me, the reason I say I just don't think it's working is because it's the same excuses over and over again in this regulation set, and the same thing over and over again. Now, why I haven't called Alonso out yet, but I will by the end of this season, is Alonso, again, you can, in Formula One, you can only really judge against your teammate. And I know that Alonso has a much easier teammate in Stroll, so that should be said. But in terms of the car maximization, whenever the car, like in 2023, when that car came alive, it wasn't like a Hamilton where Hamilton was only kind of maximizing every now and then and George was maximizing most of the time. Alonso was maximizing it all the time. Alonso maximized it even in Brazil at the end of the year when the car had a sniff of being good. 2024 was a crap year for that car. Alonso maximized it all the time. This year has been a shit show, and like he hasn't been maximizing the car. I think this weekend is the first time we've seen him maximize that car this year. So if this continues on for the entirety of the season or for most of the season, then I'll call him out. But his, where he's been in the machinery he has consistently been, at least from the outside looking in, maximizing it. When that stops, like it has so far this year, of course, he's been unlucky as well to give him, as has Hamilton at points. I will call him out. But for the moment, it's been, let's be honest here, 7 races of not being, on top of the Aston Martin. And we knew this was going to be a difficult year. And in this regulation set, we've seen a phase of like races where the Aston was good and he maximized it every single weekend. Whereas Hamilton's had glimpses of his former self and then constantly been struggling with the car. And the struggles have been to the point of ridiculousness. Whereas with Alonso, you can tell that he's just getting what he can out of the car. There's not like this car's crap, the setup's bad, I don't know what I'm doing. That's been the key issue for me. Alonso's been very much consistent with where he has been in the past, which is pulling things to where he can. And I know Ocon kind of showed him up at points as well, but Ocon can be brilliant for 8 races out of 24 every year. But yeah, so yeah, we'll see. I probably will call him out by the end of the season if he hasn't kind of kicked out something in, at least. Let's go to another question. This one's from Sarah, which says that, did the front wing change do anything? Well, I'd like to beef myself up here for a minute because I've been saying something for a while and got called out on it by a few people here. McLaren didn't bring a new wing this weekend, and it seems to me that McLaren have been running the new wing for a long time. And in fact, I am fairly sure that given the balance of that car, the trickiness of that car this year and so on, I think they've been running that front wing. I think they rushed a front wing that would fix 4 of these regulations through at the start of the year. And I think they've kind of figured out the setups on it. And I think, we saw that in race pace, the Red Bull was very good. So this weekend wasn't a really good example, I think, of these either. Because at the end of the day, the race pace for the Red Bull was very good, but the McLaren was still there. The quali pace was down for the Red Bull, but I think they were focusing on race pace. I get that feeling because they were quite a bit further off. But if not, then this is another situation where the TD backfires and hurts other people. And I also do think it has changed some of the order down the field, because I think that certain teams have been running a more stiff front wing for a while now, like Sauber, for example. And we haven't seen the proper order there. Has it done anything? I don't know. I think it's too early to tell, especially because this is very much a high-speed corner track. There's not a big variation of corners here. There is a few, I guess, isn't there? But since they removed the chicane, less so. So I think we need to see in Canada and a couple of other races more to see what the effect has really been. But yeah, I said this for a while. I think it's going to affect throughout the field. But when it came to McLaren, one, I thought they were running it for quite a while anyway, so I didn't think it would have a huge effect. And two, if I'm honest, it's one of those situations that just constantly happens in Formula One where the other teams call for change. The FIA step in, they try and kind of, mess with the order a little bit because of pressure from the teams, not because the FIA want to, because for anyone who doesn't know, like the FIA, they own the championship, but they lease it to Formula One. So they get a lot less money for this. So like there's not the incentives to change up the order for the FIA as much as there is for Formula One management. So they get pressure from the teams, from Formula One management. They change the order, or try to change the order. And the simple fact is if you're the fastest team, it's because you understand more about the car than anyone else. Red Bull understood these regulations more than anyone else, which meant when you change the technical regulations, like we did with TD35, was it, and 18 back in 2022 and into 2023, you upset other cars and just made Red Bull more dominant because everyone else had to then figure that out. And I think that's the issue you may see once again today. You may see that Red Bull, who pushed for this, actually have less room to move now because they have less flexibility in the front wing to work with and they understand the car less. You see Ferrari move forward a little bit maybe over the next few races because they didn't have that flexibility for a long time now, just like McLaren. Perhaps they, like McLaren, tried to engineer a front wing from the start as well. And you see Mercedes getting messed around with as well. So I think this is always the case because at the end of the day, the fastest car is the fastest car, like I said, because the engineers understand that car the most. And therefore, when you take something away from them, you're actually taking more away from everyone else because you're giving everyone else less room to catch up. And you're exposing areas where that team is already better than everyone else. And it usually backfires and makes the dominant team more dominant. So I think this is another one of those situations where, you're restricting everyone else's chances to catch up. Everyone else could have done something more with flexibility and made more radical designs. And especially in the last year of a regulation set, there's very little that people can do in terms of upgrades. So I agree with Lewis Hamilton on this one. You've just caused the teams to spend a lot of money, caused a lot of waste, and changed really nothing. I think he may rue that conversation for one reason, which is I think he's in the Ferrari, and as much as they were off the pace in qualifying and the race to an extent compared to Red Bull, which, look, the Red Bull's the second fastest car this year, whether Verstappen fans want to admit it or not, on average it is. I think this may help Ferrari to an extent. So yeah, thank you for the question, Sarah. And did it do anything? Yes. I don't think we've seen it yet, but it didn't do anything to McLaren, I guess is the simplest way to put it. It may have affected Red Bull's qualifying pace and leaving them with less options. And it may have brought Ferrari forward. So it did do something. And the midfield order was so close. I think we will see some changes there. But I think that's the end of the long questions. Change up to this week is I am doing some quick fire questions. So these ones are going to be rushed through, kind of let's just answer these within a couple of minutes. Let's mix these up here. So these are the quick fire ones. Let's see. So, no name on this one. Why did Norris give up at turn 1? Yeah, I mean, look, because he's crap at starts is the obvious answer, right? There's the cynical way you could look at this and the optimistic way you could look at this in terms of Norris and his chances and so on at the championship. I guess depending on which side of the fence you lean to. I lean towards, I think that it was actually a pretty decent start by Norris. And I think there was a lot going on at turn 1, as we saw with George and with the Ferrari and so on. And George jumping, and Leclerc behind and so on. I think it was messy at the start. And I think Norris could have gone 3 wide. But I think as soon as he saw it happen, he didn't seem to even try and fight it. I think he kind of knew he had the overwhelming pace with their strategy, confidence and everything. And had the measure of playing it out over the course of a race. And I think also because of where Piastri is right now and after Monaco, my take is simply that I think Norris has kind of stopped thinking about the championship. I think he realizes when he gets in that mindset, he just throws everything away. And I actually think it was quite a smart move to play it out. I think Rosberg may have touched on that as well, kind of going like, look, he's in a championship fight. At the end of the day, Max can afford to crash or whatever because he's already way off the points anyway, and he's kind of driving on a Hail Mary, which, might be the wrong attitude given that I think the Red Bull is closer than expected, and it will get closer because they're going to keep bringing upgrades. But yeah, anyway, so that's the optimistic, view of this. That I think it was a good move by Norris, and at the end of the day, it worked out, and that's all you can really judge it on. The pessimistic view, and the one that I guess there is some credibility to, is that he just once again got a poor start, and because of that poor start, he basically lost the run. I think there is something to be said for that. He did just get a poor start, and therefore, he was at the mercy of others, and he decided to give into it. But those are the two sides to it, really. I guess I know it depends on how you feel about Lando, which one you'll land on. But yeah, thanks for the question. Bob, who at this stage do you think will win the championship? I have to give it to Piastri at the moment. The problem for Max now, for example, is that he's 49 points off in the championship at the minute, so it's a long way off. That's two DNFs he would need, basically, or two pointless streaks he would need for Piastri to fall off. He's also 38 points, is it? Behind 39 points behind Norris. So he would need Norris to drop off as well by at least 2 races over the course of the season. He could still win. It's a long season left. There's still, 14 races to go. So, he could still win it, but I think it's less and less likely now. Because at the end of the day, he's got the second fastest car, so he has to be maximizing points. And today he threw them away, and he threw them away in Saudi Arabia as well by not understanding or adapting to the new rules. And I think we're seeing Verstappen a little bit under pressure. He has been absolutely phenomenal as well at races. And as most of you know, I call Max the best driver since Schumacher, and I don't take that lightly as a Vettel fan, for example. But yeah, I think Max, he's kind of in Lando's position from last year. It's an outside chance. It's a very outside chance now. Unfortunately, he was in it, I think, until this race, because it was one race win, one DNF away. He threw away so many points this weekend that I think it's going to be hard for him to claw that back. Then again, you know what? You could have, the McLarens crash into each other, but you would need that to happen twice now, is the issue. So he could still be there. Norris is obviously the key one in the title battle. If I'm saying Piastri is the favourite, Norris is the outside favourite now. The problem I have with Norris is not the points deficit and not the pace. I think he's getting on top of this car, and I think he's getting more confidence in it. The problem I have with Norris is just that at the moment, today's race, I think he played everything perfectly. He stayed on Piastri. Piastri didn't make any mistakes. Piastri's now kind of in the race on pace, on par with Norris. But Piastri just makes better decisions, makes better race starts, and those kind of fine details is where Piastri will get ahead. So I think it'll be nick and tuck between the two of them in terms of points, because I think there will be races like Monaco, Canada could be one, for example, where Norris will have the pace in qualifying and he'll gain that 7 points, or maybe Verstappen gets in the middle and he gains 10 points and they're on par with each other. I think the problem is, as soon as we get into a title battle, as soon as it's par and they're fighting each other, Norris lets the pressure get to him in a way that Oscar won't. And that's why I just think Oscar will win out, because of that pressure. So if I had to choose right now, it's Piastri. I think we'll have a better view after Silverstone, to be honest. I think the next couple of races are really going to tell us, what is this championship actually looking like? But yeah, I think if we got to a point where we're 2 or 3 races from the end and there's 3 or 4 points between them, in that situation, it's Oscar for me now. But we'll see. Things could change. Things could change. Tanya asks, were Williams hit by the front wing? No. Look, I think Williams are very good in a straight line. They're very good in traction zones and even medium speed corners. The high speed corners they're okay in, as long as they're short high speed corners, like the ones we see with low traction zones and high speed corners and so on in Miami. But as soon as you have what we have here, which are the kind of long, high grip, high speed corners, Williams just falls apart. And actually, Albon said before this weekend that, everyone's going to assume the wing change has hit them because of this weekend. And this is what I actually thought would happen to McLaren as well. coincidences in Formula One. But yeah, no, they weren't hit by the change. Obviously, if we go to next week in Canada where they should be decent and they're hit, you could maybe start going into the conspiracy theory view of it. But from what I've seen, no, it doesn't seem to have anything to do with the front wing at all. Frederick says, is Max still in the championship? I think I've answered this one. Look, never count Max Verstappen out. But I would say Piastri is the favorite, Oscar or Lando is the outside favorite, and Max is still the outer outside favorite. Look, Max still has the second fastest car on average. I think Mercedes, now that they're kind of boxed into where they are, I know they're second in the championship, but that's because they have two drivers that can fight with their car. Red Bull only has one. But yeah, I think that Mercedes very much now over the rest of the season will stop bringing upgrades and start focusing on 2026. They're expecting to have a very, very fast car in 2026. So I think that it just makes sense for them to dive in and get on top of the next year's car. So I think Max will, and Ferrari never, to put that in perspective, Ferrari constantly just fuck up for the past God knows how long. So I think that it's very much going to be Red Bull versus McLaren. So I wouldn't count him out. He'll have the second fastest car. The problem is he no longer can really count on, he can no longer really count on things going his way. So he's going to have to really blitz it, and he would have to win a lot of races. The problem is, like, if he finished first in the next 5 races, he still wouldn't be on top of Oscar. He would need to finish, he would basically need to beat Oscar for like 10 races in a row or something. Or no, 7 races in a row. Yeah. Yeah, he'd need to beat Oscar, sorry. If it was a 1-2 with him and Oscar, he'd need to beat him for 8 races in a row. The thing that could go his way is you could have Oscar and Lando crash. That could be 25 points if he wins after that. You could have mechanical faults because we have seen the Mercedes engine blow up in customer teams. So he's still there. He could still win the championship. But he needs to now think of this in terms of maximizing points and hope, and really hope that the other two ahead of him do what they were doing this weekend and last weekend, which is taking points off each other. So he's still in it for now, but it's a very long shot now, is the way I would put it. And our final quick fire question. Jeff, you love to say it. You love to say it. Is Hulkenberg now better than Hamilton? I think now? What are you saying now for? Look, I've been a huge Hulk fan for a very, very long time. Hulkenberg, I don't know if many of you are watching since Hulkenberg came in, but Hulkenberg's junior career was spectacular. Like, Piastri is very much like a Hulkenberg. Hamilton, for example, his junior career. Hulkenberg, we all thought would be the next kind of new young Hamilton to come into the sport. And in his first season, he did very, very good. He got a pole position in Brazil that year. It was in his rookie season. And then the tires changed and he never really got on top of them to an extent. And well, he did, but by the time he got on top of them, he was in midfield cars and he never got that podium, and that hung over his head. Hulkenberg is a very, 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 very capable driver. And I would say, honestly, like, when Red Bull were looking outside of the field, they really should have looked at Hulkenberg. And the reason I would say that is just that Hulkenberg is incredibly adaptable. And he's been at so many teams now through so many regulation sets that kind of he can adapt to anything. And I think that he also drives, in a not a similar way to Max, but he is capable of driving those very on the limit cars, on the edge cars. And I think Red Bull maybe should look at him as the outside driver if they're not willing to kind of ruin another rookie for next year. But is Hulkenberg better than Hamilton? No, obviously not. But he is a spectacular driver that I think is overlooked quite a lot. And a brilliant race by them today. I think Sauber today is probably the one indication that we may have a mixed up grid due to the technical regulation, because we know that they were running a wing that, as I think it was Binotto put it, they never had any flexibility in their wing from the start. So, I mean, why change the wing? Basically, they've been the underdog so long that if it has affected any midfield cars, they would be the perfect ones to gain on that. But yeah, Hulkenberg, just spectacular. That is all the questions for this week, guys. please do leave your comments, because obviously there's no race this weekend. So please leave your questions in the comments. I'm only going to be doing long episodes from now. I don't really have the time or want to jump into, putting out an episode every day or whatever. So I'm going to do these long videos, this and story time. So if I could ask you guys a favor, if you're watching this and if you're longtime fans of the channel, first of all, please do check out Storytime. I changed the name of the channel, as you know, so I could do F1 videos, but also cover a big passion of mine, which is automotive. And I just did the entire history of Mercedes. The entire history of Citroën is coming this week. But I am going to kind of jump into doing these post-race and Sunday long-form videos. So let me know if you like Storytime, if you like this format, what changes you would make. And also, maybe what I could do is outsource someone to take these episodes, cut them up, and put them on a separate channel, which I may call Wheel Sports or something, just to top the, tip the cap at the old channel. I may do that. If you think that would be interesting, let me know. I could just put clips from this channel, from purely the F1 videos over there, because I know there's some of you who may enjoy the 4 to 10 minute videos that we could put on that channel. So let me know what you think. And yeah, thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. This will be available on Spotify and YouTube as well. And thank you so much for watching. Bye. If you stuck around till this part in the video, it means you've probably enjoyed it, I would assume. And if you did, that means you'll probably also enjoy my F1 podcast, the blatantly biased racing podcast, where I'm joined by my co-host, the casual F1 fan, every week, as well as a range of other guests. And it's basically a weekly podcast where we just rant about everything that's going on. Sometimes an hour, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, especially if we get a good chatty guest. So be sure to subscribe to that if you haven't already, and hopefully I'll see you there. Thank you again for watching. Bye.